Paris, 1922. Renowned guru P.D. Ouspensky, considered one of the greatest esoteric philosophers of his time, was literally trembling. His hands were cold and sweaty as he waited in the antechamber of the Prieur de Base's loges. The man who had conquered the European intellectual elite with his theories on higher consciousness was about to meet someone who made him feel like a frightened child. George Ivanovich Gurdjieff was not just another spiritual master. He was the man who made other gurus question everything they thought they knew about enlightenment. Respected mystics left their encounters completely shattered, questioning decades of spiritual practice. Today you will discover why Gurdjieff was called the Black Magician in European esoteric circles, and how one man completely revolutionized our understanding of spiritual awakening. What you are about to discover about Gurdjieff's methods will change your perception of what it truly means to be a spiritual master forever. Gurdjieff possessed something no other guru of the time had: the ability to see through the most sophisticated spiritual masks and expose the brutal truth about anyone's real state of consciousness. And that terrified even the most enlightened. In the spiritualist salons of London, in the theosophical societies of Berlin, in the improvised ashrams of Paris, wherever there were spiritual masters, Gurdjieff's name was whispered with a mixture of fascination and terror. He had become the most feared and respected figure in the Western esoteric world. To understand why Gurdjieff scared other masters, we need to go back to the origins of his revolutionary methods. For 20 years, he had traveled the most secret corners of Central Asia, not as a spiritual tourist, but as a relentless investigator of human nature. In the Sarmaung Monastery, in the mountains of Afghanistan, Gurdjieff witnessed something that would change his life forever. Monks who had spent decades in meditation were unable to maintain full awareness during simple activities like eating or walking. He realized that most spiritual practices created temporary altered states, not permanent transformation. It was during a dervish ceremony in Turkey that Gurdjieff had his first major revelation: these holy men are all asleep, even when they seem most awake. He observed that mystical states were often sophisticated forms of escape from reality, not genuine encounters with it. Unlike other seekers who collected spiritual techniques like trophies, Gurdjieff developed a brutal science of human observation. He learned to identify, in seconds, the self-deception mechanisms that kept people trapped in spiritual fantasies. But what Gurdjieff discovered about himself during this journey will shock you. If this journey resonates with you, leave a like. In the Caucasus Mountains, Gurdjieff faced his own fundamental illusion. After years of seeking enlightened masters, he discovered that he was looking outside himself for what could only be developed through relentless inner work. An elderly dervish, whom Gurdjieff had sought for months, greeted him with these devastating words: "You collect knowledge as others collect coins. But knowledge without being is just mental noise." At that moment, Gurdjieff realized he was as lost as those he would later come to teach. For weeks, Gurdjieff experienced what he described as the death of the self he thought he knew. All his spiritual certainties, his years of esoteric study, his mystical experiences, everything collapsed before a clear perception. He had been sleeping, dreaming that he was awake. It was in this state of complete disorientation that Gurdjieff made his most important discovery. True spiritual work did not consist of reaching special states, but of developing the ability to be genuinely present in the most ordinary circumstances of life. As he later wrote, "The way to the extraordinary necessarily passes through the completely ordinary." But who has the courage for the ordinary when they can fantasize about the extraordinary? Have you ever felt lost in your spiritual quest, realizing you were looking outside for what can only be found within? From this profound existential crisis, Gurdjieff began to develop what he would later call the Fourth Way, a method that offered no spiritual consolation, but rather precise tools to see the truth about one's own state of consciousness. When Gurdjieff arrived in Moscow, he did not come as just another Eastern guru preaching peace and love. He came as a surgeon of consciousness, equipped with precise instruments to diagnose and treat humanity's most common spiritual disease, the illusion of being awake. His first students in St. Petersburg were all respected figures: philosophers, artists, intellectuals. P.D. Ouspensky, who had already written about higher dimensions, expected to find confirmation for his theories. Instead, Gurdjieff systematically demolished him. "You speak of cosmic consciousness," Gurdjieff said to Ouspensky during their first meeting, "but you cannot even be conscious of how you are holding this teacup. How can you claim to understand the cosmos if you do not even understand your own basic movements?" What happened when Gurdjieff decided to publicly test a famous Hindu mystic challenged everything Europeans believed about spirituality. Swami Bharati Krishna Tirtha, considered one of the greatest authorities on Vedic philosophy, arrived at the prier accompanied by fascinated European followers. He had come specifically to expose Gurdjieff as a charlatan before the Parisian spiritual elite. What followed became legend in esoteric circles and forever changed how the West viewed spiritual authority. Gurdjieff said not a word. He simply sat before the Swami and began to observe him with that penetrating gaze his students knew well. The silence stretched for 45 minutes. The tension in the room was palpable. Then Gurdjieff spoke only one sentence: "You teach what you have read in books. I teach what I have lived in my flesh." The Swami tried to respond with quotes from the Vedas, but his voice began to tremble. Something in Gurdjieff was exposing the difference between book knowledge and authentic realization. Gurdjieff asked the Swami to demonstrate a higher state of consciousness. When the Hindu mystic entered his meditative trance, Gurdjieff simply clapped his hands once, loud and dry. The Swami came out of the trance completely disoriented, like someone abruptly awakened from a deep dream. Gurdjieff then calmly said, "Special states of consciousness that can be broken by a clap are not higher consciousness. They are sophisticated escape from ordinary consciousness." At the prier, Gurdjieff had created something unprecedented in the history of Western spirituality, a scientific laboratory for the development of consciousness. Every activity, from cleaning stables to performing sacred dances, was precisely calculated to break automatic patterns of behavior. While other masters offered techniques to achieve special states, Gurdjieff created impossible situations that forced his students to be present. The famous movements were sequences so complex that it was impossible to perform them on autopilot. Comment on which insight about spiritual methods has impacted you most so far. When a group of theosophists visited the prier expecting elevated discussions about astral planes and ascended masters, Gurdjieff put them to eat vegetables for 8 straight hours. "You want contact with the divine?" he asked. "First learn to be present while pulling weeds." News of Gurdjieff's unspiritual methods spread quickly. Annie Besant, leader of the Theosophical Society, publicly declared his methods dangerously materialistic. Rudolf Steiner, founder of anthroposophy, avoided any direct contact with him. The revelation you are about to hear about why Gurdjieff caused so much fear changed the course of Western spirituality. Gurdjieff did not scare other gurus by being more powerful or more knowledgeable. He scared them because he possessed something they had long lost: brutal honesty with himself. And that honesty mercilessly exposed the lack of authenticity in others. Unlike other masters who cultivated images of perpetual serenity, Gurdjieff consciously used intense emotions, anger, humor, even apparent cruelty, as tools to break his students' habitual patterns. "I am a mirror," he explained. "I show people what they truly are, not what they imagine themselves to be." Those who survived Gurdjieff's terrifying methods discovered something extraordinary. For the first time in their lives, they were experiencing genuine states of presence and awareness, not spiritual fantasies. The famous writer Catherine Mansfield arrived at the prier, given up for dead by medicine, seeking spiritual healing. Instead of consolation, Gurdjieff made her sleep in the cow stable. "The smell of manure keeps me more present than years of meditation," she wrote shortly before she died, completely transformed. As Mansfield recorded in her diary, "Gurdjieff showed me that I had been dead for years, but still breathing. Here, finally, I am alive, even if only for a short time." P.D. Ouspensky, initially the most resistant of the students, underwent a radical transformation. "For years I thought I understood higher consciousness," he admitted. "Gurdjieff showed me that I didn't even know what ordinary consciousness was." The prier became a magnet for intellectuals, artists, and sophisticated seekers. But Gurdjieff made no distinction between a famous philosopher and an illiterate peasant. "Before the truth about oneself," he would say, "all are equally ignorant." How would you apply Gurdjieff's brutal honesty to your own spiritual journey? Visitors described a unique sensation upon being in Gurdjieff's presence, a fear that was not negative, but rather the sacred terror of standing before someone who saw completely through all masks and pretensions. It was terrifying and, simultaneously, liberating. Unlike other gurus who created dependent followers, Gurdjieff trained people capable of independent inner work. His most advanced students became, themselves, authentic transmitters of the work, not mere repeaters of techniques. When Gurdjieff died in 1949, he left something unprecedented in spiritual history, a complete system for the development of consciousness that functioned independently of the master's personality. His methods continued to produce results decades after his death. Modern psychologists like Carl Jung recognized that Gurdjieff had anticipated many discoveries about consciousness and presence. His insights into divided attention and self-observation influenced the development of transpersonal psychology and mindfulness practices. Gurdjieff proved that true spiritual awakening is not a comfortable or comforting experience. It is a process of death and rebirth that requires courage to face the truth about our real state of consciousness. In our age of light spirituality and comforting gurus, Gurdjieff's teachings remain a powerful antidote to spiritual self-deception. He reminds us that true growth happens in the discomfort zone, not in the comfort zone. As he himself said, "I do not teach spirituality. I teach how to stop lying to oneself. The rest happens naturally." Today, fourth way groups exist all over the world, keeping Gurdjieff's transmission alive. Not as a religion or philosophy, but as a practical science of awakening that continues to scare those who prefer the comfort of spiritual illusions. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more revelations about the masters who revolutionized our understanding of human consciousness. Gurdjieff did not want to be loved or revered. He wanted people to awaken. And for that, it is sometimes necessary to frighten those who are deeply asleep, dreaming they are already awake.